So good morning, one and all everywhere, and now here. Good morning, LA. I just saw you for a second. And all others that are with us today. We're here to talk about sobriety in the vein of the mental obsession and what occurs once the obsession to drink or use drugs or recovery from any compulsive behavior or impulsive behavior or reactive behavior. Any recovery tends to expose and leaves us wondering how to deal with what we compulsively ran from and thought we could get away from, when in fact, wherever we run with mental problems, they go with us rather than running from us. So beginning to see that that's a fact helps, I think, diffuse the tendency of thinking that running is going to ever help. Because what happens is we're actually running from the cause of the problem, so the problem continues to grow, and we're developing all sorts of other ideas about how successful we're being because we feel different, when in fact, all we're doing is trying to manage a balance to something that we're denying we're even doing. And to your point, Dee, about thinking negative thoughts and my sense is those negative thoughts, when they're compulsive, are negative because we are in fact nurturing ideas that aren't true. And ideas that aren't true only exist on the basis of thought. They only exist in brains. They only exist for people thinking about them. They don't have any life of their own, and yet can feel as though they're intrusive and attacking us. And if you listen to people's stories very often, they'll talk about feeling like their thoughts are attacking them and their ego's attacking them and their brain or mind is attacking them, and that sort of reference, which is impossible. Because none of those things inside of us actually have a life of their own. They are byproducts of the life we each have in terms of this life form. And to mistake them is to end up using them as an excuse to continue to do what's causing the impression that those thoughts seem to make, rather than beginning to concede and admit that it's the thinking I'm doing about the thinking I'm doing. And I would go even further. In my experience, it was when I started realizing it was the thinking I was doing I didn't think I was doing, that seemed to be in the dark, and as a result haunted me and felt like it was out of my control because I didn't see it, just like people who used to think the horizon was the edge of doom and that there was nothing but doom beyond it, when in fact the entire rest of the sphere, this planet, this earth that we inhabit, was always there. There was no lack of Tahitians or Polynesians or beautiful tropical islands or continents beyond that horizon, while people thought that there was. And all it did was impair their ability to set sail and live fully in terms of what was available. So they missed all the tea in China for quite a while, unless they were in China looking at the horizon. And that's largely what we're talking about. It's very, very simple. And the simplest thing is the easiest thing to complicate, because any other version of it becomes an attempt to convert it into something it isn't. And when all of a sudden we're struggling with something that isn't what it is, we're not struggling with the thing we're claiming we're struggling with. We're struggling with our thinking about it. So we're talking about our thinking about thinking, and also noticing that if we're actually thinking, we talk about our subconscious and conscious and say that we don't know what's in the subconscious, yet we openly talk about a subconscious that we claim we don't know what's in. That's a pretty convenient excuse to both admit that we have it and know it, and then claim we have no idea what's going on in it. And I would suggest the reactive feelings that we get that are depressing is the awareness of that attempt to hide those things we're doing and think that we can get away with it again because they're in the dark. We keep them in the dark and think, and then they cause the same haunting effect that kids feel when the lights go out. The ghosts never seem to be there when the lights come on, but the kids always think they must be once they're out because they can't prove they're not. So it's just another layer of this connivance and this seemingly impossible thing to overcome, because we're seemingly having it in ways it isn't. We're trying to make believe that how we're thinking of it is true, rather than realize that truth does not need our thinking at all to be true. Not at all. We are free birds. We're free agents of that truth and reality. That's our nature. And to think in terms that are unnatural is to think in terms that are unhealthy and immoral and non-virtuous and non-valuable and useless and dysfunctional. Naturally. Those aren't consequences that we should be trying to overcome. If the thing instigating them is being maintained, they're always going to be there. To sort of spend our life feeling better about those things is to actually maintain the problem for an entire life and wonder why we feel worthless. It's a worthless effort. It's never going to work. So for the new gentleman with us today, and I don't think there's any women, we spent some time, new LA, I know, yeah. We spent some time talking about the teeter-totter in life. And when it's out of balance, destabilized, we can always put things on the other side to bring it back into balance. And if you can notice that you're able to take what seems intractable, the point of these negative thoughts, it seems impossible to get rid of them. If you can notice that you can do something to actually make them feel better, it's easy to start to see that they aren't as solid and intractable and permanent as they seem if we can move them and start to actually float their needle a little bit. They're actually flexible and they're transparent, literally, because they're just images that are projected, like putting your arm up when a movie's going and seeing the shadow of your hand on the screen does not really block the projection. It blocks the ability of the projection to reach the screen. The projection's occurring on your arm and you're using it as an excuse to pretend that it's not there. And somehow the image you're looking at is completely screwed up when in fact you're the one screwing it up. So our thinking about our thinking, very interestingly, because thinking of itself creates ego, which is a self born of thought. So then we start thinking about those things we're doing negatively as who we are. I'm negative. I'm a negative person. We're not. We're doing things that are negative. That would be like attaching the negative end of a battery to your skin and saying, I'm negative. We're already positively charged and negatively charged physically. It's part of our nature. To even exist, we have that combination going on in us. Everyone does. Everything does. There's all a balance, a natural balance occurring for us to even consider being negative. Like I said the other night, what was his name? I'm forgetting the philosopher, the German philosopher, but he said, if you can even consider whether you belong or are part of the world, you're confirming your part by the consideration of it. So it starts to sort of turn back on us immediately, because my contention is there are no secrets in the universe. Every cause we create immediately has an effect. And when we don't like those effects, we act like kids and think they weren't what we wanted, rather than see the effect is telling us any shortcoming in our understanding in terms of how things work. It's giving us perfect guidance system, just like if we were unable to use something in the new cars that are completely automated and have 400-page owner manuals that nobody ever uses. So my suspicion is everybody learns how to drive the car, but they don't learn how to utilize 800 other options that are available. But ours actually would be like that book, immediately turning the page and highlighting the paragraph to the thing we're struggling with and saying, here's some direction. Those feelings we get are telling us automatically that we're creating friction, we're creating struggle, we're creating conflict. And to do that is to impose the feeling of doing that. And so what do we feel? Depressed, conflicted, wrong, bad, less than, low self-esteem, naturally. Not as some not as something we want to try to get rid of, but begin to respect. This is good information if we're willing to use it and utilize it and start to actually act on it simply by admitting that it's happening rather than wondering why it's happening. Because I can guarantee you why it's happening is because we're lying about something. We're in conflict over something. We're trying to push an idea into the world that has no basis. And there's no place for that thing to be applied in the world that is built on basis and fundamental principles. The laws of the universe do not change because all of a sudden we float some idea that we want to accomplish something or think something that isn't true. So we're welcome to do it. And we're so free as to be able to hold ourselves in contempt and even kill ourselves over the struggle we have in our brain, thinking we're going to put ourselves out of the misery by stopping the thinker rather than simply noticing it's only a thought, period. It's no more than that. And it's never happening at any time other than the present because we are always in the present. You hear people say a lot, I'm really working to be in the present. Imagine someone capable of completely violating space and time and then worrying about if they could get back to the present. Pretty interesting. They have the power to violate the entire universe, yet they don't seem to have the power to get back. They've never left. All that left was the thinking that they were doing. All that seemed to leave was the lack of substance in the thinking. All the disconnected feelings are disconnected thoughts because they have no place in reality. They don't fit anywhere. So to maintain those thoughts in my head is to have a sense of disconnection, which leads to loneliness. And pretty soon, if I act on those things because I think it's who I am, rather than simply seeing it as something I'm thinking, it's easy to start seeing that when I think my thoughts are true, I start thinking who I am is all I think only. That's self-centeredness. I think the book's pretty clear about what that means. Bill says, I don't think I said this the other night, but he says, completely abandon yourself. That is no direction to try to take this self we think we are and make it better and get self-help to be better. Think of the self-help industry. Billions of dollars a year is spent on all kinds of new trends and variations of what to do. And all we're trying to do is feel better about what we're doing that's worse, rather than say, what are we doing that's worse so chronically to constantly need to feel better? And nobody ever says, I need to learn to feel worse. Pretty good indication, and yet it's in plain view and being overlooked. I would say addiction causes a sense of blindness because if we're looking at something with no substance, there's nothing there to see but what we pretend it is. There's nothing there. If you're looking into pitch blackness and think you're blind, you're wrong because you're seeing pitch blackness perfectly. There's just nothing there to see. There's no visual light. So the accuracy of this conversation, or the aim of the conversation, is to start looking at things accurately and honestly. Not to create our own truth, because if truth created us, that's done. It's already in perfect order. It's already the order of the universe. It's actually so well ordered that we're here to even struggle with it and question it by our own choosing. And with that, any thoughts?
Mark, alcoholic. Can you hear me, Jack?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that delivery, and it only strengthens what you spoke about the other night, and really appreciate you. With this thought in mind, and what came up for me was the message that The Secret had planted into us when we watched that documentary. And after spending a couple of years with Jack Canfield and Michael Beckwith and several other authors that are responsible for that, I came to respect the fact that thoughts become things. And I didn't really like that as a person in recovery. It's a little creepy, a little scary, but then if I flip the coin and turn it around and not think about negative, I'm one of the most positive persons that I know of in terms of, valuation and helping other people, walk out the door with a smile and make sure somebody else smiles, after I smile to them. I do that every day, throughout the day. And it's for me, it's common sense, but, um, you know, forgiving myself was hard to do, working through my steps. And after watching Joaquin Phoenix last night in his latest movie, I really see the big picture now, and then speaking with you, Jack, it helped me out quite a bit. So I am trying to get a different perspective now on, what people think about me from the past, going on 5.5 years now, um, and try to rewrite the script a little bit, you know, carry into a more positive me, and uh, create the future, again, and that's what I'm doing. I've got a lot of stuff on my plate right now. I've got a ton of stuff on my plate. Fear is a great motivator for me, but I'd like to hear how other people get through that storm, so to speak, and what they do to, get through that, or at least start obtaining your goal in sobriety, or, a correction of your thoughts, etc. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Well, I'll pop a couple bubbles because that's what I'm here to do. And one of them is, we're not here to stop thinking negative thoughts, because every atom and every molecule in the entire universe has both negative and positive in them to balance themselves. That's part of what makes up the nature of this universe. So what we're actually doing is looking at the fact that we're creating an abundance of negativity by denying what we're doing. And it isn't negativity that we're opposed to any more than thinking. We're not talking about not thinking here. We're starting to see that thinking actually is designed. It's one of the things that separates us as a species. It's one of the great advantages we have, to be able to innovate and create and produce and imagine. And yet we've used it in a way that turns our instincts upside down and backwards, so that all the things that would help save us end up killing us. And that's what addiction's about. So the difference is, in the negativity, is the idea that we are trying to get over it that actually maintains it. And the idea we're trying to get away from it, it's kind of like we've got a bungee cord attached to it. And the further and faster we run, the tighter it gets. And eventually we just slap back and wonder, how did I get back here again? Why am I exploding? Why did this happen? I'm caught off guard, announcing that typically I'm on guard over these thoughts, because I'm defensive over these thoughts, because I'm reactive over these thoughts, because these thoughts have no other basis but my defense of them. Truth doesn't need any defense. Truth isn't at risk. Our nature doesn't need any defense at all. Doesn't mean there aren't things within our environment that we can protect ourselves against. But when we become the greatest predator, we tend to think those things out there are nothing compared to the things we're doing. And we end up subjecting ourselves to perils that would otherwise seem to make no sense to us if we were to look at them rationally. And so the job, as far as I'm concerned, if there is one in terms of this practice, and listen, our DNA that we think is intractable is adjusting and all the time to the environment that we're in. It's constantly adapting and trying to figure out how to do the best it can for successive generations. Well, we are the most successive generation. At the point we were born, we were at the forefront of that. We were like the train on the locomotive of human history. So everything that has ever been done wrong in human thinking that has had an impact on the body, that the body didn't quite know what to make sense of because it was insane, is part of our heritage. We're living in a body that's geared toward trying to figure out how to fight something as though it's really there. And my sense is, Mark, that the forgiveness, never comes when I continue to insist on doing the thing right now that is unforgivable. Because it's the thing I'm doing to undermine everything that I've been given. All of the assets I've been given, I'm creating a liability and making believe I am that liability. So what do? Cause liabilities in my world, cause shortfalls, act scarcely, have less, constantly need others to fix things for me. Praying to get out of jams all the time, when in fact all I'm praying to, because if that's the base, if I think who I am is what I think, my God is ego. I don't pray to God as an infinite source that's given me everything. I pray to God, or whatever that thing is the thing that condemned me. And I need to somehow get out of it. And please, if you just do it this time, I'll never do that again. Bullshit. I'm doing it in the claim I'll never do it, because I haven't ever looked at things accurately. And the reason I make that point is my sense is, looking at some human history without having to look at it all, that humans have been fighting over thoughts and using those thoughts to claim the indignant righteousness that gives us the justification to kill other humans so that the world is better, and often in God's name. Pretty interesting, God, that it would be so fretful over its own creation that it would require the people it claims to be fretful over to fix the problem by killing each other. Seems a little bit lopsided. And yet, addiction, overdosing, suicide, homicide. Think of the homicides going on right now. Kids, 19, 20 years old, just going into schools and wiping kids out. Interesting. What was originally an illicit drug problem has now become a prescribed drug problem. Same thing. The addiction didn't stop because it was illegal, or didn't start because it was illegal. The dereliction wasn't based in the illegality of it or the illicit nature of it. The addiction was in the corrupt nature of the thinking that humans have been doing long enough to give some people the impression that's the best they can do, and as a result, the only thing they can do. And that's a good definition of addiction. And this has been a mental problem for millennia. Even the Adam and Eve story talks about, Cain kills his brother and God says, "Where's your brother?" He says, "I don't know." He's talking to God. You'd think he's the third person on the planet. He might know this is God. This isn't somebody he can fool. This isn't some idiot he just came across on the street. He's going to try to get away with something. And what does he do? He lies. It's been part of the human story. If we've been doing it, it might be worth exploring it from a broader view and start to see this has been the ultimate pandemic that has caused more grief and more pain and more suffering than anything else, because it has undermined our own capacity to maintain the natural homeostasis or balance in our physicality that allows our metabolic and immune system and parasympathetic system and cardiac system, our lungs, our all of it, vascular systems, to function. Stress causes inflammation, ironically. Pressure actually expands things. It reduces the ability of the body to function healthy. And we feel it, and because we know it. We know better because we have a knowing sense that's greater than all the thinking we can do. And I would suggest thinking isn't knowing, and knowing doesn't think. An absolute knowing source doesn't sit around and think about itself because he has nothing to think about. It already knows everything. It's not wondering. It's not curious. It's just expansive. And it's expansive in our view because we see things in limited views. In its own view, it's not expansive. And it probably doesn't think, I'm the guy. Of all the guys, I'm the guy. I got it all. Because it's just a knowing, loving, generous, supportive nature. Exactly as the second tradition announces. Our only authority is a loving God, as he, she, it may express itself in our group conscience. The group conscience is made up of all of our thoughts. Each of ours is all of ours, and we are all, as a species, witnessing the sum total of what we each think we're thinking alone. And in the same way we think our subconscious is in the dark, we think what we're thinking is exclusive to everyone else, rather than see that we're actually impacting everyone with everything we're thinking. And when I am in a state of highly charged thinking, people are absorbing that, and it's affecting people. And like gravity, the further you are from those people, it might have less impact. But the further I am from them, the closer they are to somebody else. And the ultimate effect is a sum total of everything we're witnessing today in terms of the circumstances and the social ills that are becoming so prevalent and obvious. So the point I make, Mark, is to start noticing that those thoughts are literally cultural ideas, for the most part, superstitions, mythology, stories you've told, ideas you have. And we don't have to know what they are to simply recognize what's evident in the present, because it's all that there is the present. And everything happening that's happening everywhere is happening now in the present. So we are right now, we have everything, and that's true for every now we ever have. Everything is with us right now. And to concede that is to start to say, oh, I have been wallowing in ideas that obviously aren't true because I'm feeling the disconnect and I'm feeling the negativity and I'm feeling the pressure I'm creating. That pressure is giving me evidence to finally get my attention to say, hey, apparently you don't have any perspective in what you're looking at, because if you think of a single point that we constantly trying to make when we're trying to be right, there's no perspective in a single point. There's no dimension. And yet our feelings give us that, and our circumstances offer us that, and our interactions with other people offer us that. We will use other people to blame so that we can try to avoid what they're actually helping us see by giving us the perspective that if we don't want to take the information from the same way we don't want to take it from what we're experiencing in our own feelings, we're going to walk away from them saying, fuck you, instead of thank you. And it's all based on an unwillingness to say, I'm creating it. If I'm overlooking the cause and constantly trying to fix the effect, I am never going to resolve it. And I would say that's, in our own experience, unforgivable, because it's not giving things what they are. It's not letting things be. It's taking them for what I think they are and demanding that someday my thinking's going to be right about them. That's a pretty negative approach to inner conflict and emotional turmoil and all of the things that we claim to struggle with and are sick and tired of, but apparently we're not tired yet to be doing it. We seem to have some energy. And I would say a lot of that energy is coming from adrenaline and other chemicals in our body that we have it released so that we can seemingly survive to overcome these seemingly insurmountable odds when we are the master of those odds and the slave to them simultaneously. That is insanity. Mental illness is popular today. It's a trend. It just doesn't look as good as a new car. So conceding it, Bill even said in the big book, he said, it's easy to admit, I may have said this the other night, it's easy to admit you've got a problem with alcohol. It's a little tougher to admit you're mentally ill. And he said that in the book. And he's right. The stigma has gone on for so long. And yet the irony is freedom provides all possibility. And that possibility provides the chance that we can choose to go wrong anytime we want. Anytime we want. And yet the freedom is, okay, so I went wrong. Correct. Adjust. If I'm in the oncoming lane, I don't have any incumbent requirement to stay there. I could get back into the other lane if I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But when I think I'm right, I keep hammering home the idea that I can't do anything else. And that's the addiction. The addiction is the worst thing I can do is the only thing I can do. And the irony of choice is that choice always allows not to be chosen. So what do? Claim we have no other choice. That's just a blatant lie. That's blaming choice for not being what it is, but what we think of it again. Comes right back to this idea that our thoughts are true and real when they're not. So any of the negativity that you experience, Dee, when it becomes overwhelming, is being insisted on as being something to get away from typically, because we're giving it credit for actually being something that we're not doing. We're thinking of it as something that's just a plague happening in our bodies as some foreign alien sense or being. It isn't. What's alien about it is that it has no place in the universe. And that's ironic that we call aliens that we've never seen alien when we are probably the aliens. because
Yeah.
no species has ever treated this planet less carefully and considerate than we have. We have used it and abused it for all of our purposes and not noticed the consequences or want to claim them. And still today, we debate whether or not what we did was what we did to cause what we've caused, whatever it is. I'm not saying that we caused, there's all kinds of things going on the planet. Who knows? I don't know where the line is exactly, but I know the line is a line at some point as a result of what's actually happened that did cause corruption, that did cause pollution, and that we are struggling with today. Whatever that line is, it is. It doesn't need my assessment, and I don't need to locate it on a GPS thing to know that it's there somewhere. It's the same with us individually. If we're doing what we're doing and thinking we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, while we're doing what we're doing, we're claiming that what we're doing shouldn't be happening, when in fact what we're doing is what's happening. That's a conflict. And that's largely what we're talking about here. The practice in the face of others in this discussion is a chance to start noticing that we have very cleverly, and I am at the dead center of this. I think I wrote in that thing the other day that this is not a foolproof conversation, and I am evidence of that. My participation is evidence of that, because I have done so much foolishness in the name of thinking it was who I was, and I was going to promote a stature or evidence of my success, when in fact it was just stupid. Nothing more than that, ignorant. And ignoring things, by the way, is the source of ignorance. So if we're doing what we're doing, it seems to me talking about it might be valuable. And in this conversation, the value is often hearing other people talk in ways that they think is unique to them, and start to see that they are talking about the same thing you're doing that isn't unique at all. It's very much in common. If we share a common basis, we are doing the same thing with different faces, places, and times attached, thinking it's distinct, when all we're doing is using that to claim that it's us, because we're so, with self-pity has become such a armor of valor in a sense. We think it defines us, and it's always this way, and oh boy, I'm just a lowly creature. Not so. It's just what we're doing in thought and giving the impression of. We've decided to take on a role in a play, and instead of wanting to be the star of the play, we've decided to be an extra off stage. That's a decision. We were each given the starring role of our own experience, because we're dead center of it all the time. Stephen Hawking said, when you start looking at the universe as infinite, you see that the center is everyone's place. Big difference from thinking I'm at the center and you're not, because now we're all at the center together. And that reveals an absolute nature. When you start dealing with infinite things like principles, you start noticing that what's infinite does not vary for anyone, so it is what we all have. So if that infinite source is responsible for all life forms, the universe, whatever is out there, well beyond the universe is probably small compared to an infinite concept, tiny, then we are all part of it equally. And if it's responsible, we're responsible. And if I'm responsible, it's not me alone carrying the load, it's all of us carrying the load. And the irresponsibility is certainly a possibility, but it doesn't make us irresponsible. It makes the choices we make irresponsible. We can correct them anytime. And the fact is that nature gets better, like anyone who's drinking poison would get better by stopping. When nature is left alone compared to the things we tend to do to heal it, they often make it worse. Nature tends to repair. Healing tends to happen when we're not inflicting more and more and more and more toxic thoughts on ourselves, and as a result, chemicals that are designed to actually be used only in emergencies, and we're using them for false emergencies that go on 24 hours a day for years, rather than the 2 or 3 minute spurts. We need that energy to actually escape getting run over by a car or chased down by a bear or some actual threat occurring. So we can try to balance the thoughts. And if we don't notice that we're continuing to maintain the thoughts that's imbalanced, we're always going to be working to try to feel better. And as a result, we're actually continuing to simply ignore what we're doing at the root. And I would say we're ignoring the fact that our absolute nature is absolute. And it is not diluted, and it is not part-time, and it is not only when we feel it. That source is that source, regardless of what we think. And we wouldn't exist if it wasn't. So our existence confirms our place.
So one of the things, Aaron, I'll call it, one of the things that you talked about is our thoughts tend to be kind of all over the place. They're not really centered in right now, and doing something different. So somebody asked the other night, they asked about how do you change the focus on self-reliance. Like I've heard it described like, and I really like, I heard it one time and I can't get it out of my mind, but like I'm toxically self-reliant, you know, that I feel like that I'm capable, that I have the ability to pretty much deal with anything that comes up. So I tend to try and apply that philosophy to everything that comes up. And sometimes, many times, it's probably not accurate that I'm able to like to effectively deal with something on my own. You talk about like, you know, I think it was, you were saying thinking is perfect order, and I'm hearing it's like accurate order. I'm looking at, you know, like when I'm looking at things and thinking about things, and then I'm finding that there's some situation that I find is not acceptable, right? And that's the basis of like this negative thinking that I have. It's looking out and seeing that I keep creating this thing. So the question really is in a situation where, I mean, it seems like such a simple answer, and maybe it's just trying to like say, well, it can't be that easy to just like do something different, right? Because it feels like that it's not. Like, you know,
Of course.
I'm looking at,
didn't it feel that way when you drank? Didn't it feel the best thing to do was pick up a drink with thousands of experiences or drugs?
And I guess that at the end of the day, like the simplest thing to do, or the simplest beginning to make, was to not take that first drink.
Okay, so let's talk about that right now. Right now, let's think about that, because you're right on the point, Aaron. If it's as simple as noticing that it's not what we've always done, it's what we're doing right now, it isn't because we can't stop it. It's because we're thinking of it in some way that isn't correct. So when you said, I talked about thinking being in order in the present time, we're always in the present, always. This little thought, as you shift to it and start noticing that it isn't possible to even exist outside of the present, that everything that exists is in the present, everything. And to think we're not, think of how powerful we have to think thinking is for it to not be where everything else is. Think of that. Who do we become? The creator. We're creating a whole new world. And we think, like that thought, by the way, going back to you, Mark, that thought that thoughts make things up, a thought is a thing made up. You know what defines things? Something happening. Thoughts happen. The thought is made up. We miss this point that thoughts are things. So I can't be a thing I do. And when you think there's a self to be reliant on, you have been glued to the idea that who you are is what you think so long that you think who you are is what you think. Because the natural second thought, when I think I'm the creator of thought, of reality and truth in my thinking, is to immediately think all I am is what I think. And what do I have? An imperfect lie that I'm now trying to be reliant on. Think of being reliant on a lie and wondering why we're struggling. What would the reliance on a lie be but a promise to fail and a promise not to break the promise? Wow. And I'm actually reliant on that, and I think I'm going to fix that by thinking more about it. What did I say to the woman when she asked the other night? She said, "What do you do?" Remember?
Yeah, you essentially said, don't just
Yeah,
do
I
the
said
next
nothing.
thing.
There's nothing to
Yeah.
do. It's a delusion. So when I start actually addressing what's happening in the present, rather than thinking it's going to happen some other time, think how convenient it is that when we start thinking about a self that doesn't exist, we immediately start getting into what we think is stuck in our heads to go into the past and talk about everything we haven't done and should have done and might have done and could have done and wish we'd done, so that our future would be better, but we're never thinking about the present. Why? Because the present's already doesn't need any thinking. It's already complete. It's already whole. It is the absolute.
So the solution is into action. Stop.
Well, it's not into the action of continuing to lie.
No, it's into the action of doing something. If something is not okay the way it is, right? Like I'm relying on self, or I'm like worried about all of these things internal. It's to just stop the thought process and do the next right thing.
No. It's to let the thought process continue and notice that whether you like what's happening or not, it's happening. And whether you think it should be or not, it's happening. And whether you are absolutely incapable of accepting it, it's happening. We miss the obvious and then act oblivious to what we're doing as though it's some secret, when all we're trying to do is escape what we know in the name of trying to develop thinking in this impossible direction that it will never succeed at doing. So if you didn't know this, Aaron, if you didn't know this, D also, Mark, if you didn't, everyone actually, but you guys are new to the conversation, so I want to stress this. If you didn't know this, you wouldn't struggle. That would be your nature. Struggle would be your nature, and you would feel successful and full and absolutely fulfilled by doing that. But you don't. So the clue isn't in the why and the where and the what and the how and the what did I do? What, why, where, when, how? It's not in any of those questions. You know what questions lead to? More questions. You know what humans have been doing through history? They're always on a quest. Why? We've been asking questions that apparently are questionable. One of the main components that people tend to struggle with is doubt. Self-doubt, doubt in others, doubt in goals, doubt in all that stuff. Why would that be if we were confident? We wouldn't even need confidence if we were simply dealing with things as they were, because the confirmation of our correctness or our accuracy would be confirmed in everything we do. And we would use everything that's happening immediately saying, I got a perfectly built guidance system until I make believe I don't, and think that who I am is what I think. And all of a sudden think that I'm going to fix the self made up in thought that has no basis other than what I keep thinking about it. So I'm thinking over here about it, and I'm thinking over here I need to rely on it, and keep wondering why it's constantly changing and never sits still, and I think it's broken, when in fact all I'm trying to do is keep it still. I'm trying to fix it in the sense of, you know how when you fix your epoxy, it gets to that state where it's fixed and it stops molting and doing what it does, and because those things are chemicals you use for the jobs you do. Right?
Great example.
So they have that process they go to, and then they're fixed. It's done. They've achieved that state of their own homeostasis. Now, underneath it all, they're still swirling molecules and doing all that stuff. But for what we see and what we need from it, the form that we get, they're done. It's fixed. Doesn't mean it can't be scratched. It doesn't mean it can't be destroyed, but it would be very hard to replicate it from that liquid gel to that finished product by trying to, as you said, sand it down, polish it. Very hard to do that manually compared to just letting it rest and then dry. And if you get dust in it, which is almost inevitable, you almost have to be in an airless environment, all of a sudden that becomes an imperfection that in that glassy surface becomes obvious. So we are looking at those imperfections and seeing these thoughts we have as being everything because they've destroyed everything we're looking at because we're looking through a lens that's obscured. The thinking, the understanding we're doing is misunderstanding. And understanding is really designed. Think of the word understanding. It's the foundation beneath our feet. It's understanding, like substance, same thing, substance, substance. It's what we stand on. What's that? Our position. If I'm standing in a position that's weak and the foundation is weak, the Bible says it, it's been talked about forever. If you build on a sandy foundation, it's going to shift. Why am I always shifting, changing? Because I got a foundation that has no foundation that I keep making believe has a foundation. And I keep wondering why I'm trying to stabilize the structure I'm building on top of it. And I'm running in circles, going places, and it never seems to be that productive. Seems to be a waste of time. I'm right. When I say I'm wrong, I'm finally right. When we're willing to look at wrong as being wrong, we're right. Interesting. You know what else is true about that? If you look at a lie as a lie, guess what it becomes?
The truth.
I mean, it's the truth in human terms, but really it's just accurate. There's no energy in it anymore. There's no conflict.
Our head says it's the truth.
Well, that's to think your head speaks for itself as though it's separate from what you're choosing. We're using those things to give them more credit to justify the insanity that we keep relying on them and think we're going to get them right so we can be better, when it's the trying to get them right that's making us feel worse. We're actually doing the thing that's causing the problem, just like with alcohol. We drink more, we think we're getting better because we feel less. But the reason we drink successfully more and more and more is because the underlying problem is growing as we ignore it. And what we need to do, like pain medication, is stay ahead of the pain. If you don't stay ahead of the pain, you start feeling the pain. Pain is not evidence of reality and truth. Pain is evidence that something is wrong. And we misread it by thinking we need to get away from it as though it has some force of its own, rather than a consequence or an effect of the cause that we're creating. You and I, all of us together. To the degree that we don't talk about this together openly, we will continue to perpetuate it seemingly individually.
How do the negative thoughts work for you, Aaron? When you say you have the problem you're having is negative thoughts, what does it sound like?
The problem, I don't know that the problem is necessarily negative thoughts, but I think that the problem is more inaccurate thoughts.
Very good.
I mean,
You said negative though originally, right?
No, I think somebody else said negative.
Well, you know what negative thoughts are? When you have an inaccurate thought and think it's right, you're trying to negate the inaccuracy of the thought.
Wow.
You're trying to disappear it. You're trying to pretend it's not there because I'm going to do something else to pretend this is real because I'm not willing to simply notice that's the thing that's wrong. Period. Over. Done.
That's great. Love it.
So to start looking at what we're doing, not what we're doing, but that we're doing what we're doing, what still becomes a question. So I don't know how to better phrase it than that. To start looking at, for it to be happening means we're making it happen. Just start to look at that and say, wow, if I am causing this right now, Maybe I can spend a minute with that thought rather than run off into the new thought of how I can get away from it, feel better about it. What do I need to do? I need to meditate. I need to do this and that. Meditation becomes our present state of awareness when we aren't cluttered with conflicted thoughts that seem to be attacking us. You just start noticing you have a very meditative, absorbent state and say, wow, there is a lot going on here, and I can do anything I want freely. And that is an adventure. This is an exploration. This isn't the end of the line because I'm trying to fight for the edge of a thought that doesn't exist. It's the beginning of everything. We think,
and isn't it weird that the word meditate has the word like medication in it?
Yeah. Well, I've heard many people talk about prayer and medication in the meetings.
Yeah. I do competitive meditation.
I'm sure you do. It was called manic depressive.
I think I spend a lot of time trying to think my way into playing junior lawyer with myself, that whatever situation that's happening is correct.
Exactly.
Bingo.
It's
Bingo. I love this guy.
Bingo, Aaron.
Yeah.
Mm.
So if you're trying to take something with no substance and turn it into reality, how long do you think that will take you to do?
Indefinitely, apparently.
Exactly. And you know what that means? You're present. There is no indefinite anything because the present is always present. There is no forever, which is why forever is just a haunting idea that goes on for fucking ever, and you never seem to arrive.
It goes on forever.
The present is always present. It's always been present, and it's sort of the concept of forever in the present, but it isn't forever because when it forever comes, it's present. Just like the past and future, there is no past and future in any other place than what we think. There is no lies. There are no lies anywhere other than what we think. They're all concepts in thought. That's it. The past is a memory of what happened. And you know what? It isn't what happened, what I remember. Never. You know why? Because when I'm remembering it, everything that's happening now is happening, not everything that was happening as it was happening when it happened. I can't replicate it in any absolute terms, but I can start to see that if the present has a hold on me in some way, the only place to deal with it is in the present.
Yeah. Aaron, do you remember the first time? I'm just curious. When is the first time you started doing this type of analyzing and figuring it out? Like you're saying you like to be junior lawyer and figure out something. When did you start doing that?
Well, I think that from the standpoint of looking at it from this way today, how long have I been with myself?
Yeah, when did you start the other way originally?
When did I start thinking about it from in the context of these principles today?
Yeah.
No, I mean when you were saying
But
what it means.
Anthony, you're fishing for something so you can help some conclusion you're strong.
No, because I remember the first time I did it, and I'm just wondering.
You're doing it right now. Let's talk about that. That's the point Aaron's getting to. Looking at this accurately is starting to see that we never did it back then. We're doing it now to think we did.
No, you just didn't understand the question.
No, I understood. I understood the question. How long have I been playing junior lawyer with myself? My whole life.
No, when's the first time? The first time.
He was 3 years old, Anthony.
What's the difference, Anthony?
Who knows?
You know when it was, Anthony? The first time.
The reality of it is not. Like I could say, I can't go back and point to an occasion where all of a sudden I felt this need to be able to justify something that was inaccurate and then just focused on that. I can't go back and point to something like that, but I can look at this right now and say that I had never considered that my current reality is one of trying to justify an inaccurate or seemingly untenable thing.
So, Anthony, there is no past to refer to other than the one we thought of. And I can guarantee you, if Aaron thought of the time he first did it, that wasn't the first time.
Well, for me, like I remember we never had a Christmas tree because I'm Jewish and everybody else had one. So I probably started rationalizing right around there, I bet, why we don't get presents and everybody else is.
Please. You were starting well before you even knew what a Christmas tree was. This history has been in our DNA. It doesn't start because something socially bothers us. This starts when we have any thought that's inaccurate that we don't act on accurately. Any thought. But the point is, Anthony, to go back there and think there's a back there to go is exactly what we do in making believe we're not where we are with what we have, and that there needs to be some explanation that we can come up with to help justify.
Well, I'm saying you can't do both. I'm not saying to do one or the other. I'm saying
No,
it's great to do both.
You can ask, certainly, and you can search. But the point of this discussion is to start looking at the immediacy of what's happening.
Right. I agree.
And start having it as it's happening and practice that rather than the age-old tendency of trying to create a story about it that isn't.
Or have a story, or as we talked about before, it's okay to have a story as long as you know it's a story. I mean, stories are fun, but is when you start thinking that story really is the way it went, now we got a problem. That's the fine line.
The difference though, Anthony? Immoral stories are excuses why we shouldn't have done what we did and wouldn't be where we are if we hadn't. And in fact, you know what? We're always right where we are, regardless of what we did. We're exactly where we are as a result of everything we've ever done. So now that speaks for everything we've ever done right there. All those points you might go looking for individually are the sum total of everything right now, just like everything that's ever happened is the sum total of everything we're witnessing right now. Everything. Pretty amazing. Now we know all of history because we're in it. We are it right now. Period. And the seeking and the searching is an endless effort to think we're in charge of the result rather than be thankful for the essence of something that we can't even fathom in thought.
Well,
it's incomprehensible. It's hard to apprehend. And what do we do with our stories? We think we're in control of them. We think we use them to give ourselves some ballast so that we can hold ourselves down and wonder why we feel weighty and heavy and depressed, rather than say, oh, this other thing doesn't have any weight. Light, as a matter of fact, has almost no weight to it. And truth and reality, I would say, doesn't have any weight because it's not in a spatially dimensional time. Remember what we talked about? I mentioned the other night about the fourth dimension, Bill having the insight in 1939 and prior to talk about rocketed into the fourth dimension. And when light speed is light speed, but if anything approached light speed, time and space, time wouldn't have any impact on it. None. It means it's not in space and time. It means the present, I would suggest, isn't in space and time because it's an infinitesimally small, it's a non-quantifiable point because it's so tiny, because it's always present, it's always present, it's always present, it's always new, it's always starting, so it never gets old. There's no dimensional aspect to it. And you know what the fifth dimension is in physics? It's the melding of all the electromagnetic energy, which includes all matter and energy in the universe, and gravity simultaneously with no distinction between either. And what's our sixth sense? Intuition, knowing. That knowing comes out of the intuition of knowing is a product of seeing things in absolute terms rather than in seeing them in the divisive, indivisible, or divisive divisibility that we think is invisible, but we give context to in our own thoughts by thinking the thoughts are truth and reality.
Perfect segue. We were trying to figure out what intuition actually means. And Aaron, what do you, when they say
knowledge
intuitively
beyond reason?
So what does that mean to you, Aaron? What is when you intuitively, what is intuition?
Anthony, what does it mean to you? You're asking the question.
I don't know. I haven't figured it out.
I just said it's knowledge beyond reason. You know what it means?
Give me an example.
No thinking. So your question's irrelevant. You already know. You know now what it is, and you're acting like you don't so that you can justify some of the thoughts you're maintaining that aren't true right now. So we know we're aware, we know it, or we wouldn't feel bad. We wouldn't struggle. We wouldn't suffer. We wouldn't feel guilt. We wouldn't feel shame.
Like if my room wasn't clean, I know it should be clean, but I'll find a reason why.
I think this is going a little beyond your bedroom. I think your bedroom, like any story, is a justification to start to focus on something other than what we're talking about. You have a present awareness, Anthony, right now, and so does everybody else. I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know. I'm just talking about it. If there is an intuitive sense and there is an absolute knowing, how could we not possibly be part of it right now? And not part of it as though it's some small thing, but absolutely of it. Impossible. It wouldn't be infinite if we were able to be exceptions to it. Wouldn't be possible. Morning, Sturgis. So
good morning, Jack. Sorry, I didn't hit my button right.
That's all right. So, Anthony, I'm challenging you because you and I have dealt with this for a long time. I'm challenging you and trying to pop a bubble maybe by being a little confrontive. And just notice, to Aaron's point, that if it's what I'm doing now, there's no story I'm going to come up with to help me get better at it, because I'm already using the story to try to get better at avoiding what's happening right now. That's the point to talk about. That's the actual, I've never been in a discussion with anyone who wasn't present. We're always present, trying to think about things. Think about, when I sit in an audience, my head's all over the place very often. I'm not really listening to people. And I would suggest that most of what we hear when we're thinking obsessive thoughts is not what's being said, it's what we think we hear. Because we're so married to the thoughts, we're trying to confirm what we're thinking is right. So we'll hear things in ways that we think are based only on what we think rather than what's actually being said. And that's good to notice. And I think we'll hear each other do that, including me, when we repeat what somebody said, like that game of telephone, and really hadn't heard what they said. We only heard what they thought they said. So if human communication is somewhat littered with this constant inability to actually recognize what people are thinking, there's probably a lot of thinking going on and talking going on that is worthless, because it's just a spattering of an attempt to make believe that somehow it's true by talking more about it. And at the same time, missing the principled issue, which is this commonality between us that we know is wrong, that we're struggling with. We're struggling by the admission of those thoughts. We're struggling by the admission of that inability to listen. We're struggling by all of those deficiencies and announcing it publicly and then being written off because somebody says, well, you don't listen to me. I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. And it's an indication that I do that exact same thing internally and try to dismiss the thought I think I have by getting another bigger thought and think somehow or another I'll get better that way, when I'm actually just complicating the whole thing and making it worse and wondering why I feel worse. So here's a point to think about. If we can make something that's completely unnatural, completely self-made, people talk about being self-made. That's what ego is, by the way. It's self-made. We make it up. But if I can,
why can't we make it better? If we can make it so negative, why can't we make it better? Is that what you're going to say?
Well, yes, it isn't why can't we? The fact is, if we can make it worse, we're actually able to make it better. But why do we continue to make it worse?
Yeah.
Because we're addicted to the thought someday.
Great point.
Somewhere in us, we're thinking about something that isn't true. And I don't need to know where that somewhere is to admit it's here now. Now is what I'm doing. Now is the sum total of those thoughts. If I can't engage around these concepts and even talk about them without defending the thoughts I have in relation to them, it's a pretty good indication that I think my life depends on those thoughts I continue.
And that's why somebody that you're talking to that's a little upset about something doesn't want to talk about the now, right? Because the now, it's not really there. They want to talk about why it happened. And
so you're talking about yourself.
Yeah.
The bedroom.
Well, not the bedroom necessarily, anything.
Well, Anthony, think about it. We're here. We're not cleaning your bedroom, and you brought the bedroom up. So I'm pointing out how easy it is to deflect from the conversation about something that we all share intimately. And as we talk
when you
about
say
it,
deflect, it's not really deflecting. It's more of concurring with it. I wasn't deflecting. I was saying, with that, I do that with my bedroom. I could clean it up, but I come up with a reason. Like intuitively, I know it should be clean. But I come up with a reason why that has to be there. I don't know where to put it.
You're giving me a reason why you're doing what you're doing rather than talking about absolute terms. We're here to talk in absolute terms, not story.
Yeah, that is absolute. I absolutely should clean it.
Jack, Thank you. I have to bow out. I have a lesson. So thank you, folks. I really enjoyed
Thank
this.
you.
Thanks for coming, Mark.
All right. I'll be back.
I'll see you and I'm around too, if you want to
Okay.
talk.
All right.
So Anthony, you got 166 hours a week to clean your bedroom. And almost every week we talk about it during.
Do I
these-
really have that much time if you take out sleeping? I mean, really, if you're really going to
Well, do you ever get up and wake up at night?
I get the point though. The bedroom should be clean. Intuitively, I know that. and I come home.
No, it has nothing to make the bedroom. Let the bedroom be messy. Get used to it being messy, and you'll get used to some. of
No,
the
I don't
thoughts.
like that. This whole new thing about everything spotless is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I have nothing to worry. I'm always complaining why things are messy. As soon as it's all clean, like a hotel, I'm like, God, I love everything about it. And it's not me. When my room is messy, I'm mad at everybody else. I notice as soon as I cleaned up my room and made it spotless, I'm okay with everybody else.
I have two thoughts on that. One, that being present in a conversation to me is, where I fail at it is waiting for my chance to talk rather than focusing on the now, which is the other person sharing their experience with me. And when I'm not paying attention to that, then I misunderstand the reality of what their position is. So that's one thought I had. And then the other thought that I had, and this is probably where I'm going sideways with everything, is that everything is okay and everything is exactly as it should be right this moment. And if in the next moment I want something to be different, that's my chance in this moment is to get up and say, you know what, my bedroom is perfectly fine, dirty right now.
Yes.
In the next moment, I probably don't want it to be that way. So why don't I get up right now and go do some of that? And
Yes,
if not,
exactly.
then focus on, then just, move on with it being fine with the way it is right now, because I'm in the middle of doing something else right now. I'm participating in this discussion and trying to stay present here rather than worry about.
Well, but let's stop there for 1 second.
Yeah.
You're always present. Always. And you see that even in the conversation, it's very easy to use this historic thing about what we're trying to do because we thought we were in charge of reality and truth, and we think it's still up to us to get back to it, when in fact we've never left it. That's the delusion of it, this idea. And this isn't a critique other than being critical enough to be accurate. And notice there's a thing I've asked everyone in here to do that initially was thought to be censorship. And I said, watch your words. And typically that term means don't say things. That's not what it means. It means watch what you're saying. And if you start listening to what you're saying, you'll see that you're saying things that reveal what you're thinking that you don't always even think you're thinking, because the words come out so quickly because we've used them so many times. And all of a sudden you say, yeah, I just said something that really reveals no words, feelings, or action, outward action ever comes from anything other than a thought. Thoughts are always precursors to voluntary actions, and speaking is voluntary. Feeling is a consequence of those, an immediate consequence of those thoughts. We immediately cause and effect are simultaneous, like heads and tails on a coin.
I like when after you speak somewhere, somebody will come up to you and go, I really like what you shared. And, I don't judge myself anymore, or I'm really focusing on being present now. And then you tell them, that's the only place you could be is I really concentrate on being present.
But that
Jack,
is
can you talk
pretty consistent.
Jack, could you talk a little bit more about the mechanics of watching what we say? And the reason I say that is, like, I have this propensity to just immediately pop off with some thought. I see a thing and to be completely honest, I probably think that I know more about whatever the hell is going on than everybody else in the room. And so I feel this need to immediately share my perspective on it. And most of the time that comes off in a really mean and dismissive way. And it gets me in trouble all the time.
Yeah, I don't like to think
why?
about what I don't like to think about what I say. I like to be just as shocked as everybody else.
So the point is, you do know not more than everyone else in the room. You know as much as everyone else in the room when you start seeing this accurately. And you also notice that not much of anyone in the room is speaking accurately to speak in terms that includes everyone in the room. And our outbursts, think about that. It's a pent-up urge. Of course, they're like darts. They're like flamethrowers. They're like spears. We're trying to pop the bubble for everybody else by thinking they have to do it first because we don't want to. We want to be the last man standing so we can go along with the crowd rather than start to be proactive in this and start speaking in terms that might convey something to other people that they don't initially get an understanding, but they start feeling in their essence. And I would say the difference, Anthony, between the knowing nature that we have is one, we just sense something's right. And the thinking nature of knowing is understanding, that's often filled with things that are so wrong that it isn't understanding anything, it's misunderstanding much.
Yeah.
And that's a very different thing. So what often happens in this process, in this conversation, and anybody else can confirm, Les has been around, LA's been around, anybody might confirm this, there's a sensation of something going on that doesn't make sense because the sense we've been making is now being illuminated, like the light is coming on and we're starting to look at the sense we've been making and saying, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And isn't it weird that
speaker or someone else to say they don't make any sense when in fact it's our own awareness of the sense we haven't been making because we're starting to open up that awareness that we've always been aware of, but we've been preoccupied with the job of thinking that not admitting it meant it wasn't happening. And that's what I would say is subconscious thoughts. We think what we're not, we think the thoughts we don't think we're doing aren't happening simply because we think we're not doing them and yet deny the consequence and the effect of what's happening right now, saying it shouldn't be happening and I don't want to feel it and I want to run away from it.
And every Sunday that you say the same thing, it makes me feel, I just notice I breathe so much easier all of a sudden, right? Just admitting that. It's just like, God, I don't have to carry all this stuff.
Well, you're not carrying it anyhow.
I
don't have to make somebody else carry all this stuff.
You think you are.
I don't have to think I'm carrying all this stuff.
So it's easy for me in this moment to see the sense in all of this and to be able to, this is correct. Are there some exercises? Is there some space, like, when in meditation we talk about, like, when you start to get away from the breath, you have this sense of being able to catch yourself and bring it back to the breath, right? And bring it back to the now, bring it
love.
Bring it out.
The word is love.
So when I'm going forward in life, right? Like right now, my mind is directly on this. What kind of tools do you use when you find yourself starting to like stray or even to, is it a matter of just awareness or
let me repeat, you're never straying. You only think you are. The thing about meditation is when we're quiet, all of a sudden it becomes obvious that some awareness we become aware of because we're not busy creating circumstances and interacting with things that get our thinking going. So it naturally starts to it fell apart in terms of the hyperactivity that tends to go on when we're moving around and thinking about things and interacting with people and places and things, right? Very different experience. And the point here is starting to notice that we're always in a state of meditation, as I talked about the other night. It's always in a state of awareness. We're always there. The question is, why do I think carving out time when I'm in an environment that's quiet gives me more peace when I'm inducing the peace by having an environment that's quiet? And so it's easy because I don't have any complications. And then when I go back into the world, I think everything's fucked up because I actually start thinking I'm no longer meditative and I'm
That's
no longer
hilarious
there because I'm thinking I'm not there. because I'm now facing challenges of seeing things go where they go, not necessarily where I want them. Driving's a great example. I mean, I don't think I ever get into my car where I don't think somebody's an idiot for doing what seems unsafe. And really often they're just doing what they need to do to get where they're going without great consideration of everything going on around them. And then I realize I'm doing that same thing to some degree.
And then sometimes you're the idiot.
No, I'm always the idiot whenever I think. Like, just to think someone else is an idiot makes me an idiot.
Well, is it a coincidence
my best time spent is to focus on what's wrong with somebody else rather than what I'm doing that's wrong with my thinking of them.
Yeah.
But Dee and Aaron, you're seeing this. So you're asking for mechanics. One of the mechanics is to start to notice the principles. I sent you the copy of that earlier. Principles are elementary to life. They are not negotiable. They are not optional. They just are what they are. They have always been what they are. They will always be what they are, just like the laws of nature and the laws of the universe are immutable. They're inviolable. They're indivisible. We can't even see them, and yet they operate, and we know them by how the effects of our actions. As we get better at noticing that we don't need to sit next to a babbling brook to make believe that we have some greater form of consciousness, that form of consciousness is not obstructed by all the things we do. The only thing that's obstructed is our functional utility of the thinking we do. That's all. Our functional capacity, our functional literacy, I call it, which is our ability to read our body language, to literally start accurately assessing it and saying, if it's happening, I'm just going to go with that. I'm not going to go with whether it should be or shouldn't be, or I wanted it to be and wished it wasn't and thought it, all that stuff. We get mired in everything. We get busy about what isn't happening and think ignoring what is happening is somehow beneficial. That's a pretty loaded gun. It's already happening. It's always been happening. Everything will always be happening as it's happening all the time. And as you think, in an answer to your question, the present is always present. That presence is absolute. That presence is the actual source of life. It is the source. Whatever that source is that we've defined in our own limited imagination has served us well because it exceeded the bounds of our thinking. And what Bill is asking in the big book is to start to look at the fact that this is, in his terms, absolute, unlimited, infinite, omnipotent, and all-powerful. How much power does that leave me if I'm not utilizing that power? And if I think my thinking's getting in the way of it by keeping me from being present, I think I am God. I think I am the creator of the universe. And so who I become is only what I think, and I wonder why I struggle, why I feel demoralized. It is immoral to think who I am is what I think. It's completely backwards. If I were an actor, I certainly wouldn't take on a role and think at the end of the night I had to stay on the stage and sleep there because I became the character. I'd never get another role. Would be insane, but we do it every day to the degree we continue to manage these thoughts in that way. And Bill said, completely abandon yourself. I don't think I mentioned that the other night because I think that's an incredible quote. He's telling us the ship is at the bottom of the ocean and you can bail water as long as you want, but it ain't floating. There is no air in that. There is no resuscitation of something that never lived. I can't kill the ego without thinking it lived. People kill themselves over this struggle. They think they're going to kill the ego by shooting themselves, hanging themselves. And compulsions in every subtle form are suicidal tendencies because they are never healthy for us, ever. They are all cowardly acts of trying to avoid the fear that we're creating. And that fear we're creating is a recognition that we are on a suicidal path and we're ignoring it. thinking of it as something to get over and overcome and feel better than, while it grows and grows and grows until somebody says, I didn't even know he was depressed. Why did he kill himself? Bill said when he got to the bar, hammering the bar, how did I get here again? As though he didn't know. That seeming blindness is just simply looking into and at something that has no basis whatsoever and wondering why we feel alone and empty.
Intuitively, yeah.
Emptiness of it is the accurate assessment of that feeling. But then we translate it into feeling, I'm alone, I'm empty. No, it's the thought. If you look at it accurately, you start seeing the emptiness of that thought as good information, because it's never going to be utilized. It doesn't mean you can't imagine it. Doesn't mean you can't play with it. It doesn't mean you can't develop some piece of art on the basis of it to stretch imagination in some great direction, or create a play around it, or a screenplay, or a book. That's what books have written for years. Culminations of all kinds of instances that are unlikely, but are fascinating to imagine. Nothing wrong with that. But when we turn imagination into reality and truth, we become the creators of reality and truth in our thinking, which we aren't, and wonder why we struggle. We can do it all because we have it all. We are capable at any moment of thinking thoughts that are wrong. To think they're right puts us on a collision course with our own thinking. We become the master and creator of the wrong, and then the slave to it in our own thinking, so we can justify what is unjustifiable and insane and idiotic and silly, by the way. It can seem so serious until you realize that it's just like I put on a clown suit and thought I was a clown. I can act like a clown pretty well, and I've done that a lot. Still do. Doesn't mean I'm a clown.
The monkey might not be on my back, but the circus is still in town.
So one of the other things to think about, you two are new, and Mark, I'll deal with him later on this, is that we talk in sobriety about contrary action. Nothing wrong with that. But it's an admission the thinking we're doing that's compelling the action we need to then take the opposite action of is still in place. It's admitting the sick thinking is still there. So if we're constantly taking contrary action, we can also as quickly begin to notice that it's the contrary thinking we're still doing that's causing us to act in ways that we want to do the opposite of, because we're starting to see that they're not wrong and they're not going to land well. Just like in your definition, Aaron, of those barbs that you throw out there when you're thinking so much about what you're going to think. And I do the same thing. I admitted the other night at the meeting that I always come thinking I know what I'm going to say, and I always leave wondering why I didn't. But the irony is, when I started allowing that, I started noticing that a lot of what I didn't think I was going to say actually just kind of comes. And I don't have to think about it at all. There's just a present. I can sense the audience. There's a connection there. And there's something that's drawn in a direction that seems to even be better than I would have thought. And that turns the process into something that I don't take credit for, but I become thankful for. And when I begin to see the greatness of this fullness that we have, I become grateful naturally. I don't need to do it as an exercise to try to overcome the lack of gratefulness I have for being an idiot most of the day. I'm not grateful for doing stupid shit all the time and acting like an idiot and making believe that somehow it's the best I can do. Why would I be grateful for that when it's not very great to do that? It's a diminution of my capacity, a depreciation of that source. It isn't a fulfillment of it at all. It's a joke. But it becomes funny rather than sad, which I think is why we all laugh at stories when people talk about things so depraved, because we know they've come out the other end and taken advantage of the experience rather than denied it and made believe the advantage was to pretend it never happened and there was nothing to learn.
I appreciate something you said the other week about, that's a thought. I really like that. I actually told that story a few times this week about, somebody was just having an anxious thought about what they were perceiving might be an outcome. And my comment was, you know what, I've got a story for you about a friend of mine. And I told that's a thought. about the tricycle. And, it was how easy that tool itself can deflate the thought, just by calling it what it is has been really helpful. I've really liked that story.
Well, and there's an old thing in physics that two things can't occupy the same space at the same time. Two identical things, right?
And not if we're going quantum anymore. We've been very excited about that.
Well,
but I'm gonna let that one go.
In the basic, I don't know at the quantum level if two things can occupy the same, because ultimately everything occupies the same space at the same time. If there is anything in space. But in the old theory, it was two things couldn't occupy the same space at the same time. And the point of that is that when I allow something to be what it is, I have no conflict with it because there's nothing there to conflict with. And to your question earlier, Aaron, and I think LA's suggestion as a tool was one that somebody mentioned a couple of weeks ago. I think Michael said that he really appreciated just that thought. It's just a thought. Because we're beginning to assign, if you think of truth as true, there's not a lot of argument in that. So part of the tools that we're learning here, if there is something to learn, is to start relying on the most fundamental, simple thing as a precursor to the thinking we do, rather than thinking we're going to get there, which we never can within the confines of our thinking. It isn't because we can't get there, it's because we've always been there the whole time we're thinking we needed to get there. Right? So that sort of conundrum all of a sudden gets blown up. If truth is true and reality is reality, they're just real and true, period. So if thinking is what we're struggling with and all we're having is a thought, and you concede it's a thought, and as LA's pointing out, seems to be serving some purpose with everyone and started to help me when I respond to people when they're upset and all that, I just say, well, that's a thought. And it kind of diffuses the argument, because then I'm not sitting there saying, well, you can't think that, you shouldn't think that, and I didn't do that, and why do you think that of me? And the audacity you have to think that of me. When the thinking I think about myself is much more audacious and hateful and loathsome than anything anyone's ever said to me. And to start uncovering that is a big relief on a body. And start to notice that the real enemy has been what I've been doing the whole time. So noticing that truth is true, reality is reality, it's where we always are. And it isn't really even where we always are, it's just what we're always of. We're aware of it. It seems to be wherever we are because it isn't in space and time. So it's also where everything else is for that same reason, because it isn't a function of here and there. It's just a presence that's absolute and doesn't change when we're interacting on these dimensional forms that human existence is based on, or the universe is based on. This is just a performance that we're doing, and we're constantly transforming, we're constantly changing, we're constantly making a difference. So when you think you need to make a change, just admit you're already doing it right now. You just don't like the change you're making. And liking or not liking it doesn't change it. Only to the thinking we do when we think we need to escape it because we don't like it and think that our life is about trying to escape what's actually happening. And that's a pretty sick fucking life. And if you don't like something, that'll be what you definitely don't like in the long run, because it's a fruitless effort. Doesn't mean we can't like things, but when you see their choices, they're just conclusions we've come to like or not like something. All of a sudden, there's a lot of flexibility in that. The same way you see that there's flexibility if we have a lot of negative thoughts and we think, running a marathon will help me feel better. It tends to get your blood going, your air going, you get some endorphins going, you feel better. Doesn't fix the problem, but it does show that the problem is flexible enough. And if you take something and stretch it, ultimately it will reveal that it's transparent too, that it isn't a block. It's our own resistance to what it is that gives us the impression that it isn't what it is and only what we think that we struggle with. So it's just a thought. Truth is true. Reality is real. It's true now. Now is the culmination of everything that's ever happened. So if you ever wonder what happened in your past, you know what it is now, period. There is no past other than in your thinking. Doesn't mean you can't think about it. but it's always going to be what you're thinking about it, and not what actually happened. You might have the faces and places right, but you're not going to have all the circumstances right. So you're using it as a vain attempt to come to some conclusion, probably in my estimation, because there's some other thought you think you're going to use it to fix, as though the thought needs fixing. And the admission that you need to fix the thought is the admission that you know it's broken. It starts getting so simple and immediate that you begin to realize, what I realized is that I was spending a lot of time making a huge mess, wondering why things seem so messy all the time. That was just a constant focus on things that weren't happening, thinking someday they'd happen if I just focus on them longer and harder and act smarter. When in fact, it was one of the stupidest things I ever did and still do. Not because I'm an idiot, because I can choose things that are idiotic and make believe they're true and then struggle with them. The fact that it's possible reminds me, when it happens, that it's possible to do it, but it's impossible to resolve it by doing more of it. And I start having it as it is, and all of a sudden that thing about duplication, where if you let something be what it is, there's no struggle with it. You can have all the negative thoughts you want. And when you just let them be negative, boom, there's nothing. They vanish. There's nothing there, because it's only what we're doing now. When I think my whole life has been negative thoughts, I create this whole narrative and a view of this picture of a parade that's been negative, and all I'm doing is creating a script and a play and visuals to support the contention that isn't true. Because what's true is everything I see everywhere that's actually happening. If there is any truth for us, I would say that's the truth. What's happening is what's actually true for humans. Anything I do to deflect it and try to hide from it and change it and get away from it and all that is all gives me the impression the thing I'm creating in my head is going to be overcome by another thought I'm creating, that I'm going to outrun it, as though it's anything more than a thought and needs to be outrun. Why is it? I just don't let it go, because I think my life depends on hanging on to it. I think that me, who that self is built into that thought, and I need to resuscitate it when it never had any life. People talk about stopping the thought. There is no stopping the thought. The point is, don't start it. If you don't want to stop, if you want to stop it, don't start it. Where do we do that? The present, where it starts. And when you live with it accurately, you're going to see that this stuff is going to vanish quickly without even thinking about it, because it's been the thinking about it that's been causing it to give you the impression that it actually had a life. As you stop thinking and start thinking in these other terms, you'll notice those other thoughts aren't happening. They're just not there. You brought light to where darkness seemed to be. And darkness never wins that fight or argument. Actually, it is an argument. Darkness is always overcome by light immediately. So some of the bodily effects I had when this started really occurring to me and I started to fall apart a little bit was that I started to cry. And at first, it was a lot of grief that had been just built up in my system for moments I'd never, ever been willing to admit affected me. And then it became just the awe of wonder just became like, I get moved by things now because I'm not as stiff as I was, and I'm not as fixed as I was, and I'm not as prone to that fight. I get to move with them and interact with them and say, wow, this is a fluid drive, and it's always happening. And sometimes I get moved at things that seem silly, but I get moved. So I would say it's the difference between self-pity and a sense of fulfillment, of actual fulfillment, rather than that sense of conniving and trying to develop that I'm in charge and I've got it all together. And I better not let anybody see what I'm thinking, but I'm going to look like I'm a lot better than I actually think. All that just starts to melt, and it becomes fun to be wrong. I love being wrong now. I mean, I just think the impulse is great. It's very clarifying. And when I'm easy about it, people don't tend to react as much and tend to laugh and realize that most of what we've been trying to do throughout our lives is not act like we're wrong and constantly try to act like we're right when what we were doing was not right at all. It was all just make believe and hocus pocus and the wave of a wand and a hallucination and a trance and a mirage thought to be true.
Hey, Jack, thanks for the invite here. I got to run and go work on some stuff. So
Glad to have you,
I
Aaron.
appreciate-
Very
I'm-
much.
Nice to meet you, Aaron. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Ty.
Good to see you, Aaron.
So you guys have a little history.
Yes, known him for quite a few years.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I spoke at the Alano Club down in South Bay the other night and met Aaron and Dee.
Yeah, I
and
asked
Mark.
him to chat how
Oh,
we got
yeah.
here. So
Yeah.
very cool.
So those are a couple of tools. I mean, I think one of the things that came up, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago when MK was talking about it's just a thought, and is to anything you guys think of that become helpful in this process, because I'm often asked, but I don't tend to, what I tend to do and am constantly looking, I'm looking at trying to define what's going on in better words and terms so that I can actually put it in some sort of order. And that has not occurred for me yet. So that's my seeming struggle, but I think it's just my inability to concede what I know and speak about it more accurately. But your help and perspective is very valuable, because some of us, like Sturgis and LA and Anthony, have been doing this for a long time. Ty is a newer comer, but Ty's been with us now for a year or so, or close. And this has got to be 2 or 3 years for LA or more.
I don't believe what you're
Yeah, I
saying is
think in 1
true,
year,
Jack.
2 or 3.
Or less.
Frankly, for me, it's the opposite. And we talked about this. When you speak and you describe things, it is frankly extremely accurate, and it makes me think of the inaccuracy or lack of depth or over-reliance on my thinking being reality in the words I choose to say. So your vocabulary, frankly, is as expansive as this discussion, in my opinion.
Well, and when I'm with you and we do this in person, it does, like I just mentioned, the thing I've learned to do when I speak is know that I tend to rehearse what I'm going to say before I get there, and know that I'll never say it.
Cheater.
And then just kind of go with what happens. And being with an audience to me is very invigorating, because I can see the faces and I can see the eyeballs and I can see the radiance and I can see the struggles. And it reminds me of the fact that we're all in this together. When I'm writing alone, and I think that's the bigger issue, Les, is that I would like to create an outline, which I struggle to do. I don't think I see this in the kind of form that would allow it to be outlined in a simple enough way to be relied on, because my words are often, and I thank you for that. Listen, I've worked a long time because I felt so broken by keeping so much to myself for so many years, things I thought and things I saw and things I knew, and not talking about it literally my sense is it was present traumatic stress disorder was what I was struggling from, because I was constantly making believe I was trying to fit into a world that didn't make any sense, rather than begin to describe the absolute nature of existence in the way that I sensed. And my sense is we all have that in what may seem different, but it seems clear enough when we start talking about it to become obvious and take shape and hold in a way that we say things we've never said and are somewhat caught off guard, admitting that we're generally on guard by seeing the capacity we have when we even lean into it a little bit, kind of like flying on a hang glider. You got to get near the bluff and jump over to be able to get the wind that's coming up there to pick you up.
People say they like to learn new things. the difference with this discussion is that part of, quote, learning new things is realizing a lot of the things that we thought we already knew and were going to add to were inaccurate, incomplete, or incorrect.
Yeah.
And that's where the issue is. Everyone comes here wanting to learn or be teachable or expand our already massive knowledge base of how things work in the universe. And frankly, your discussion, much like what we do with the process in the 12 steps, tears some of that down and has us look at things, frankly, I'll say differently. I mean, so I appreciate it, and your candor in your journey to describe how you either feel your vocabulary or your process may not be complete is just the ever-present knowledge that our thinking isn't the be-all of reality.
Well, I think it lends in another direction too, Les, because I love being in the sort of observatory mode where that's obviously things you've been thinking or at least been aware of and now are putting words to. My sense is that I was living, like many, if not all of us to some degree, with the misconception that somehow I'd get better by thinking harder about it. And so my capacity to express in the fullest way those things that I know has never been developed in the ultimate way that it could be. So what I find is that when I think I've quantified something and can deal with it every time so far, and this is why I failed to actually create the outline, I suspect, is because as soon as I get there, something else occurs where I start seeing there's a whole other dimension to it that would be lost in the smaller conversation that actually makes the explanation of it much simpler. And
Doesn't that go, this really reminds me or make the correlation of when people try to describe God, the infinite, the omnipotent, the all-powerful, the all-knowing, recognizing the limitations that we have. It's one of the few times we talk about the limitations of the thought or our mental capacity, and then add another level of limitation is the extent of the language that we have to express those thoughts.
Yes.
So, of course, don't you think that isn't this somewhat the point, even though everything that is now, and that everything is the way it's supposed to be, et cetera, on your process, that every time you would put down into words or writing or an outline, wouldn't that be atypical or antithetical to the concept of what is universal if somehow for a moment you described it in an outline, and that the reality or the possibility or probably the truth is that as things go on, that actually as your understanding expands or gets greater or your experience is such, that would evolve. You're trying to do the same limitation or the same construct in an outline for something that maybe 5 years from now would develop even more. It's just it's not a be all end all. It's more of this is how it is and can be added to. Without it, though, and this is where other people talk, because of the way you think, because of the way you organize, and because of the way you articulate things, even if we know it's true or not, it's an incredible dynamic way to look at things that probably most of us, certainly me, never thought of before. And of course, I thought I was a good thinker.
Well, and I think as we're even talking about this, because I love the exploration, I always feel like I'm the light at the head of a locomotive when I'm in this conversation, like I don't have any idea how much is behind me or what I know
Anthony and I are in coach right now, by the way.
But I think we're all that headlight. But my sense is that the words will never say it, and they're not designed to, but the reference is the beginning of recognizing that we all know it. And to the degree that I don't believe that, or don't trust that or rely on my belief or trust to think I do, I have been faulty in my ability to see the point of the words is not to describe that infinite source, but simply to point at what everyone knows in a way that gives them the reminder that they already know what I'm saying and don't need me to say it to know it. And there is a difference in the freedom of it. So my sense is Loretta's not here today or Sharon, but there was a meeting I spoke at, and 6 people afterward wanted to stay and talk a little more about what I talked about. And we spoke about the impact on their experience. So 4 of them said something that was very, very revelatory for me, because it helped me begin to see what were this sort of awareness. And Anthony, this is something you and I spend a lot of time on. But 4 of them said, I felt it was right. And I've heard this a lot. I felt it was right, but I didn't understand it. And so my struggle is allowing my understanding to be clear enough that that feeling is the sense of awareness that we have. It is actually identifying the awareness that we know, that isn't a thinking awareness. It's just a knowing we know awareness. And that when that's approached, and anyone who is willing to stand in the words that might be conflicting with their understanding, and also notice they're having another experience that seems right, or gives them a sense of place, or offers some sense of wholeness in any way, that is in fact the awareness that we're talking about, that we know, and yet have spent so little time in our thinking addressing, that the thinking seems to be disconnected from it. And my suspicion is that thinking's purpose is to express it, that it's its design isn't to conclude it. It isn't for me to conclude truth and reality, or any of us. It's to simply express it. And when we do, the better we do. And the more I know that that's what I'm doing in terms of my thinking effort, the more anyone listening would have that impact, regardless of whether they understood it. Because my sense is, if I've been maintaining a language for my whole life, and all of a sudden I'm subjected to a new language, there's going to be a lot I don't understand in that language, and that I still know what I know from my old language. And the interpretive process takes time before the immersive experience begins to have that language become what we call second nature. But I would say it's first nature when it becomes what we call second nature. You know what I mean? That transition. So if I know that everyone knows it, and am thinking in terms that doesn't quite think that yet, there's a good chance that's the impact that's occurring on my thinking, that isn't allowing my thinking to channel, just like a dam naturally knows to let the water out when the gates are open. The pressure can't. It is my own thinking about it in ways that are still somewhat corrupted and inadequate and all that. So the admission of it publicly, to me, helps me, because I don't then think I should know better, I should be doing all that. Just say, no, if I'm doing it and it's happening and I'm struggling over it, then the admission of it is that something's corrupt in what I'm thinking. It isn't corrupt in what I know. It's just I'm the guy at the damn door, literally the damn door, trying to open it up. But I got the wrong tool, and I keep trying to turn the crank, and the water's not flowing. So there's some failure in that regard, which I think I'm aware of, and that could just be some punitive, contemptful thing to get back to what I'm used to doing, just for the sake of having less of it now. And I think I need more, because for years that's what I did to confirm myself, was hate that self as though there was a self to hate. I mean, think of that. Self-loathing, when the self we're loathing isn't even who we are and just what we think. Interesting that we would only loathe it and use that to confirm it actually exists. It's pretty sick, pretty demented. But anyway, I appreciate that insight very, very much. I love to have the dialogue open and actually sort of ponder the greater potential of this expression. So less is more today.
Yeah, and I concur with what Les said. He's a very great speaker. I like the way Les speaks.
Well, I mean, so you talk about a knowing awareness, and we talk about it is, everything is. And then again, I keep that we fall back or go back to our thinking and our language and the limitations, or often fallacies or lies,
Probably
or
always.
self-perception. And so we want to use that construct, our thinking, our language, our lies, our limitations, to describe the knowing presence.
Well, but if
and wonder why we have difficulties with
if
it.
everybody didn't know it, it would be impossible. And the fact that they already know it means all that is required is to point the finger in the direction and remind, per se, people of what they already know. And that's that sensation, I believe. That sensation of rightness and that sensation of peace and that sensation. For instance, you remember when we all got started, Les, I don't think you were here, but there was a lot of reactivity amongst the people that were participating in this initially. And clearly the people who were actually willing to notice and admit they were struggling stayed, and the people who didn't left because they didn't like it. Was a little much to talk about and actually confront some of that stuff, because one of the things that becomes very obvious is that when you start shining the light on what's wrong, you recognize it's been a lot of wrong for a long time. I recognized back as far as I can remember as a kid. I can excuse it, but what would be the point of excusing it and not taking advantage of all the experience as a learning curve and a university education in seeming life or life forms or life experience?
But this goes back to that initial point that I made. There's a difference when someone says, oh, I want to have an expansive mind. I want to learn. I want to add to my wealth of knowledge. This construct that we're talking about basically says, yeah, unfortunately, the book you've written to this point is full of fallacies, and we're going to start from the beginning of this all-knowing. And then when we put it together, maybe everything you've thought or done in the past may have been viewed through an inaccurate, incomplete, or lying lens. And that's where the difficulty comes with people. But that's where I find the similarity with the 12 steps, is that I didn't know what I didn't know. And then when I found out, yeah, of course, I had to put the lens back on me to realize that a lot of the things that I thought, or a lot of things I felt, or that were happening either to me or were unfair, that really the only solution or comfort is to try to recognize either my role in it or my role in accepting it and going forward. Otherwise, I'm constantly going to be churning for either vindication, sympathy, or worse yet, putting myself in a unique position relative to what other people think and do. And when you talk about a knowing presence, this reminds me of that is either undeniable or cannot be properly argued, so that my knowing present isn't different from yours, Ty's, Anthony's, or anyone else's. And if we can, well, the only reason it's different is because I use my thought, my brain, my construct to try to describe it.
But it isn't thought, and that isn't it. What you're describing isn't it, because it is what it is, regardless of what you think.
Right. And so doesn't that talk about the similarity?
So could it be different?
Isn't that the universality which makes it so powerful?
Well, could it be different is the question.
Well, that would be horrific to me.
Hang on. Could it be different?
I don't know. I hope not.
Think about something infinite. Could it be different for anyone?
Not if it's, well, under my understanding of the infinite, the answer is no.
Keep in mind, Yeah. But if it's infinite, it's not something that's divisible. So it's something that completely transcends in all respect. It doesn't even transcend. It just doesn't even operate in a relative form. Shakespeare said in his sonnet 116 about love, love is an ever fixed mark. When altereth it finds, it does not alter, meaning that it just remains love, that love is love. And the point I'm bringing up, Les, is that we do confuse our ability to think in those terms with that reality that doesn't change no matter what we think. And the confirmation of the thinking is in the confirmation of the knowing, because the relief comes from beginning to realize that it doesn't matter what we think, that thing stays the same. And that's the saving grace of finding freedom and recognizing that it's already in perfect order and perfectly intact without any variation whatsoever. And what's simple about it is that it doesn't change. It doesn't do the things we do in thought and the variations that we experience in our life form at all. It is an absolute static state of nature. Life is a seeming force. Love is a seeming force. So some of it is easy to confuse when we jump back to our thinking we have to think about it correctly, when in fact our thinking about it incorrectly never changed it at all. And if that's the case, it might be worth starting to think about that. And that eliminates a lot of the thinking that used to think it had to get right before we could admit it, rather than say, it's already admitted, it's already who we are. I just don't think it is. And that's the big chunk to swallow. And it isn't because we have to swallow it. It is that way anyhow. If that's how it is, that's how it is. So very simple. So simple that it's the easiest thing to complicate. Any variation sends us off on these arcs, like bombs, trying to defend the ramparts of the thoughts and all that stuff. It isn't to say we can't do that. When we see what we're doing, we do it all the time, and it doesn't have any impact because we just know, oh, I'm up to some of that thinking again. Boom, done. I'm allowed to do that. I have no obligation to feel condemned by it. And so when I'm condemned, I make believe I'm obligated to that condemnation. That's a thought only. It's a thought. No more, no less. Even though less is more, it's no more or less.
Thanks, everyone. I have an appointment I'm going to be late for because, of course, I finally had to chime in and show I'm not in charge of my schedule. Hey, appreciate everyone. Good to see everyone.
Les, do you have a minute?
I do.
I want to tell you a quick story. I was in a court last week on a case that I was listening to because I was interested in it, with a judge named Chalfant in Superior Court in the county of Los Angeles downtown.
Okay. That's not his real name, of course, though.
Chalfant, that's his real name, Judge Chalfant.
Yeah.
He's an amazingly brilliant guy, but he's also witty and funny. And one of the attorneys who was young came and they were dealing with an issue. And he said, okay, here's the issue. Explain to me what you're thinking. And the guy started. He went off on this whole constitutional thing. And he stopped him and he said, in the name of one of my law professors, one of his favorite quotes, so what? That was his comment to the kid. He's like, in the name of one of my smartest legal professors, so what? And the kid just stopped and he said, you're arguing constitutional law. This is not the Supreme Court. This is Superior Court. But he was so fresh and frank, and everyone in the audience laughed, and the kid got a little lighter and got back to the point. So a lot of times in here, it's very easy to sort of sway and start to use. When I became aware of the things I was doing that was wrong, I became aware of the most glaring things, and a lot of those other things started coming up. And I all of a sudden used them and thought those were real and those were true, exactly as you talked about, the corrupted thought, the lies. And it seems to just rise in the water for a while until you realize, oh, whatever I'm doing, wherever I'm doing it that's wrong is always going to appear that way and cause that consequence, always. So if I have the consequence occurring where I'm feeling disrupted and I'm feeling empty and I know I'm doing some of that, period, done, over, move on. What's next?
Yeah, but there's the relief in that you want to let go of that.
You don't have to let go of it. It'll go because you're no longer maintaining it. You're allowing it to be what it is. Boom, done, over. There's nothing there. It is a vanishing mist that blows away, just like when the sun comes out and the fog slowly dissipates back into the humidity, becomes invisible.
That's a myth to truth and reality. It's not a myth to one's corrupted thinking.
It's only a myth when you think that corrupted thinking is so real and true, you need to do something about it rather than call it what it is, have it what it is, and allow it to be what it is. And then there's nothing there to actually have.
And how many people, when we try to describe my thinking versus your thinking, and they come to the point where, oh, you're right, I have corrupted thinking. Thank you for elucidating me that. As compared to, you know what, I'm smarter than you, I'm more articulate than you. I will show you that my thinking shows that your thinking is corrupt. And that's the ego and the thought process as compared to the knowing process.
What I come here to do every week is talk about it as we can talk about it together rather than figure out whether or not anybody else is ever going to talk about it that way. Because I can assure you, if we don't do it here, the chances of other people doing it elsewhere are reduced. And that's our job.
I totally agree with you. And part of that breakdown in that process was that resistance that you described for the initial people that came in with you, those that weren't willing to accept that as a basis or a premise of having an understanding or a meaningful discussion, retreated to our understanding and basis that did not want to disrupt that.
Well, I am still doing that thing in certain ways that I recognize by the inefficiency or ineffectiveness of my own ability to express the greatest things I'm capable of expressing, while I struggle with wondering why I'm not. So
don't you find it interesting that you say you have? I would ask, if I did a survey of LA and Anthony and Sturgis that have listened to you. And I described this to you after the meeting last week, and now I finally get to blame you for my being late. I appreciate that. Thank you, Jack. That you were saying that your inability to articulate and properly say what you're thinking, whereas the rest of us want to put you on a tape. That's how old school I am, and slow down what you say, because you go on and your points. You often say sentences that are elucidating, or at least touch us. But by the time I want to really grasp it, you're 5 sentences down the road of more things. So if anything, I don't call it a stream of consciousness, your communication is very thought-provoking, at least for me. And therefore, sometimes this process here, and I may be off the beaten path for how other people look at, but it helps me to tell you that your perception or your belief or your knowing of how you articulate things is probably, I guarantee you, is not how at least not how I would describe your knowing and your articulation.
Now that's a thought.
Yeah.
As all of us, give yourself a break.
Oh no,
you're the best. Yeah.
My break is to look at this accurately enough to notice any deficiency is a deficiency, whether it is or it isn't, and start to actually speak in that direction. And part of it is just noticing that if this isn't a conversation that's been held, I've never engaged with people around this that I didn't initiate it, since it just seemed to occur to me. And while I was getting bits and pieces from it, as it did, I continued to push and push and push in that direction, because it seems to me to be the most incredible aspect of our potential not to. I mean, sort of squander the most incredible potential of our capacity if we didn't. And the ultimate job, if we have one, is to actually learn to speak about this with others and start to notice these things we can do to diffuse the perpetuation of these stories and mythology and cultural tendencies that seem to be normal and conventional, but aren't normal or conventional to need us to chronically think about them as truth and reality. If they were truth and reality, they would not require our thinking at all. So I would like to do this in any way I can do it better, because my sense is the world is struggling and a lot of people are not well. And to talk about it in ways that allow people to even consider their own involvement in that lack of wellness is, I think it could be called a challenge, but it seems to me to be an incredible opportunity at a time when there's so much of that happening, that obviously what has been used in the past has not worked for it to be growing. And I would say on all those fronts, mental illness, anxiety disorders, disorders of all types, metabolic disorders, allergies of all sorts are growing. Suicide is growing, homicide is growing in many different quadrants, including younger kids, killing younger kids. Suicide in all categories is growing, and addiction does not seem to be slowing down at all. Seems to be growing. So in that regard, I see the failure of the communication, not so much as the communication has failed, but the expansiveness of it and the potential to reach the audience that might most benefit from it has not been achieved. So in that regard, I see it as a personal inability to recognize the capacity in a way that is possible in ways that I might think are currently unlikely or improbable or in some way less than all that could be. So that's what I want to do. And you guys give me that chance. I mean, your involvement gives me the insight that I pine for and the awareness that I pine for in terms of interaction at a meaningful level for years. And here we are doing it, which is incredibly valuable in my experience. Good afternoon, John.
Thanks, Jack.
Any other thoughts, ideas, angles? So leaving here on that note, the idea of thinking about this is one way to deal with it. And the idea of realizing truth is true and you're always present and reality is reality and it's the basis of your existence. And it's who you are and of, rather than who you are as an individual. It's what you're of as a collective source of life that we all share. And start to notice the thoughts you have about who you think you are is just what you think. Because thinking of itself thinks up a self born in thought. So beginning to actually apply those thoughts will make a difference, because everything is always changing. It's already making a difference, but it'll make a difference in a direction that seems to be one that is unusual because it is actually being productive. And some of the things you've been doing that almost act like camouflage to block your awareness or seemingly block your awareness as they vanish will have you become aware of things that are uncomfortable. I ran from that discomfort my entire life thinking I would outrun it, and all it did was get more and more and more and more until it was in my bones and my neck and my shoulders and every part of my body in terms of a charge that I had insisted on not releasing. And as I began to release it, my neck started loosening up and my shoulders started dropping and my posture got better and my legs became very obviously stiff. Things just started happening differently. So I felt healthier in certain respects, but also was challenged by what I saw. So the point of that is that the discussion of this with me or anyone else is a way to confirm not only your involvement in it, but things you might not otherwise think you're capable of talking about or admitting. And it's just an opening. Conversation can happen with anybody. And you don't need to go reveal your deepest, darkest thoughts. But you can always reveal what you're doing. You can always talk about it from a point of view of accuracy where you are. Because
what's your thoughts on Ritalin? If a doctor thinks that you need Ritalin, do you recommend that, or do you think this course that you're offering could be just as effective?
I would not even take a position on that, Anthony. Doctors prescribe things because they're doctors, so that would.
Do you know? Have you ever been diagnosed with ADD?
No. But I know that I certainly, when I'm spending the majority of my day thinking about things happening, I certainly have a deficit in attention. And I would say a lot of the diagnosis that we're talking about that seem to be growing, if you look at them in relation to what we're talking about, this addiction to thought, it will be obvious that they are absolutely contributing to whatever that problem is that we think we need to overcome. Because when I'm chronically thinking about what isn't happening, the past and future, how much attention do I have to pay to the present? Nothing. I'm almost bankrupt in that regard. I see the present as an annoyance, an impossibility, something that shouldn't be happening. No wonder kids struggle with attention deficit disorder. They're living with parents who aren't paying attention to what's happening. It's not a coincidence in the term of it being some accident. If you look at the word coincidence, it means something happening simultaneously. So it's a coincidence in the accurate use of the word, just like consequence is with sequence. It's in the sequence of events happening. It's natural. The effects are absolutely consequences of the actions we're taking. They are not some strange thing other than the fact that bodies have been transformed through time and DNA is adapted to the stress, trying to make sense out of it, which makes no sense. So some predispositions may be built into our system, but if we have made them that bad over generations, are we interested in continuing to make them worse so we can pass them on to successive generations? Or might it be worth thinking about them in ways that begin to unravel them while we have time, rather than wait for the afterlife that seems to never come and is always pondered as something that may or may not happen? Why not live in the actual life we have now in a way that's constructive enough to allow health to return, rather than constantly inflict stress and anxiety and create the dis-ease in our own systems that cause the anxiety and stress and release all the kind of drugs that are in store for well-being that we end up using up for emergencies that don't even exist. So I know people have been helped, and I know by all kinds of drugs, and I know that other people, as they've gotten sober and gotten cleaner and started to actually get better mentally, found out that the drugs were actually causing some of the problems they were suffering. But that isn't an edict on drugs. I'm not taking a position on the medical profession or any of that. I'm simply suggesting that if we can do something that's causing problems that are prolific and chronic, if we're doing it, we can undo it by starting to notice what we're doing, and it will vanish and disappear. And I imagine that well-being will be easy to recognize rather than this abiding sense of doubt and uncertainty and loathing that seems to be so popular.
Mm-hmm.
So the conversation point I was aiming toward, talking about it, even in the slightest, allows for the recognition of how little we've done it and how almost disformed our capacity is in that regard, but how easy it becomes when you do any of it, because we're actually starting to talk about what we intuitively know rather than simply what we think we know. And rather than leap into the thinking we know, start to actually notice that the intuitive knowledge is our nature. That's the fundamental basis of our essence. And essence is essential. It's not optional. Just like something indivisible is not optional. Something absolute is not optional. It's not negotiable. It just is what it is, as it is, now, where we are, as we are, period. Like everything else, it's part of it. Everything else that's real, and that everything else that's unreal is just a figment of imagination and nothing more than that. And if we are imagining it, it isn't real, because thoughts are imagined. It's all that they are. They're imagination. One of our greatest assets we've turned into a major liability. Talking about it in any vantage point gives other people and your own witness a chance to see their capability, and also the same kind of reactiveness that has been common for all of us. Because my suspicion and claim, I believe it's right, I don't know for sure, but if we share something in common that's absolute, what we do wrong is the same thing. And we just put different faces, places, and times to it to make believe it's different. We use the circumstances to say it's different, when in fact the defective nature of it is identical. It's just making believe that something that's wrong is right. Something that's false is true. Something that's true is false. Effectively, by making believe that we can turn what's false into true, we are claiming that truth and reality is false and unreal. We do it in the same simultaneous moment of a thought. It isn't because it's true or it's really happening, but the impression it makes on us seems like it's happening and seems like it's all that's happening, which is why we think we don't know better, because we have created an environment that gives us the impression there's nothing other than what we're thinking. It isn't true, never will be. And as you begin to concede it, you'll start to see you've known what was beyond those edges, supposed edges, the whole time, because you felt bad, and feeling bad was evidence of your own awareness of it. The suffering has actually been telling us, communicating that we know better. We wouldn't be suffering if we didn't. So talking about it, sharing it, the podcast is there for that reason. The reason we started recording this was so that people could actually have an opportunity to listen to it anywhere, and you could share it with anyone anywhere so that they could listen to it, and then you could talk about it and start to actually develop the facility of your own functional literacy of your own body language and other people's body language, and start to speak in a language that actually addresses the absolute nature of our existence rather than the conflicts that we come up with in our thinking. Very different approach. And we've been doing it the whole time thinking we weren't. That's kind of the sad, sick part of it. Always been there. We've just been squandering the potential by making believe preoccupying ourselves with conflict proved we were in charge. And what we were in charge of was the charge that builds up in our body and the expression of that explosive charge when it finally gets too much to bear and we let it out on someone else or something else. That has been the history of human seeming development for years. And maybe even other, John is with us, who has done a lot of research in civilizations that we don't even talk about today, for the most part, that are thought not to exist because they don't align with current archaeological and scientific methodology or understanding, that apparently there's some pretty good evidence existed on this same planet with a very high level of intelligence and somehow went away. I don't know what it was, whether it was a catastrophic Earth coincidence like the meteorite that killed the dinosaurs, or it was just the expiration of like the empires, the Roman empires and Attila the Hun and Alexander the Great and Cleopatra and all the other great empires that eventually came to an end based on the fallacy of their seeming superiority as an identifiable, distinct, separate empire within the world, rather than recognize the world is not divided. Countries didn't have lines when the old world was created. Humans have come up with all those ideas to help support the contention of this same thinking, the same divisive thinking. That's a human trait, not the world's trait. Even though rivers were sometimes borders, things that happen naturally, but they were renamed for the purpose of dividing people from each other and saving us from others that seem to be so horrific and horrendous. Anyway, John has some experience in that. Maybe one of these times we'll talk to him about that.
Hey, I heard you did a great job speaking the other day. Did you, when you were driving home, think of something you forgot to mention and you wanted to talk about that right now?
Well, I always do. I mean, there's always things that I miss, and I can jump around and all that. But I felt good and complete. I took more time than they had, and I don't tend to take directions very well. But it was, it's just an amazing crowd to be with. I don't know how many people were there. There was probably close to 100, 70 or something. I don't know. But it's amazing to look at a crowd who's interested enough to listen to things that aren't always easy to hear. And I think there's a radiance and an awareness that becomes so obvious and so palpable and so satisfying. Yeah. And we miss that in talking about things that are somewhat mundane and off course, and not being able to actually engage on this other level. And I say not being able to, that isn't true. We're always engaging on that level while we're thinking we're not. But focusing so much on the not and focusing so much on the thinking, and I'm still doing it even right now in suggesting we're not. It's a very easy trap to seemingly fall into in the discussion. Very easy. It's been going on so long, it seems to be normal to think of it in those terms, but it isn't normal at all, and it isn't natural, and it isn't healthy.
So what was the first thing what was the first thing you heard when you were getting sober that really made you go, wow, I can't, that's really the thing that
There is a solution.
that was it for you?
Oh, it stuck in my head forever. And I used to go to meetings and say, what's the solution? They'd say, did you get a book? And I say, no. What's the solution? Did you get a sponsor? No. No. Did you meet anybody? No. You talking to, what's the solution? For 6 years, I did that. So talk about density and the ability to make believe that getting better was actually getting worse and denial was actually my source. I am a poster child for defiance and denial and defense. 6 years I went to meetings explaining to people why I didn't belong there. And one guy said to me once, well, then why are you here? One guy out of everyone who bared with me. And I had to go home for a month to try to work on that problem. Why are you here? And I realized, that makes no sense. I go there to tell them why I don't belong there. It hadn't occurred to me. I was delusional. I was completely wrapped in thoughts that were so off base and so far-fetched, and thought that they were the sole source of my existence, that maintaining them defined me. And the me I thought they defined, it did define as an insane persona. That would be ego. I still suspect it's a pretty amazing thing to say to anybody who's in the cups of their alcoholism or the needles of their drug addiction or the snorting or the popping or whatever it is they're doing, the popping, dropping, snorting, shooting, to hear that there's a solution to their predicament.
Licking, sticking.
Yeah, all of it. I want to make that list, Anthony. But I know when I approach people that I know are struggling, and one of the things I say to them is, this probably isn't the best thing you could be doing. And even the people totally out of their minds laugh because they actually know it. And it isn't that confrontive to suggest it. And it generally allows for a discussion that's a little more open than telling them they shouldn't be doing what they're doing or they're idiots for doing what they're doing. And I know they already think that, and they already know that in their thinking anyhow. They don't need my help in that regard. They may not be admitting it, and they may think they're smarter than it, but they know it. Like we all know, we know what we know right now. So what is our week today? We're the second Sunday. I believe we have 2 more this week or this month. No? Actually, next week will be our last discussion for the month. Wow, we only had 3 this month. Yeah, 3. Okay, so that's a normal month. Next week will be the last one. So I will look forward to seeing you all. You're all welcome. Dee, you're always welcome to call me or email me, as is anyone else. And anyone out there, if you'd like to join us for this Sunday discussion, you can email the contact@mentalobsession.com in the podcast. You can email your email to us and your name, and we will include you in the announcement list, and then maybe expand the ideas from people around the world who have listened to the podcast now from, I don't know how many, it's 40 countries or something, and 230 or 40 different cities. And so there are people out there that obviously recognize their struggle and are willing enough to listen. My sense is that's where communication begins, with not just a speaker, but a listener. There is no communication if there's no listening. And so it's very rewarding to see that kind of activity going on out there. So anyone interested in it, you're always willing to, or always able to share it with them. And we have no promotion for this at all other than word of mouth. There's no Instagram or website or any of that kind of stuff at this point. And I expect that may develop in time as someone wants to do that. And I don't know much about that because I've never been on Instagram, Facebook, or any of those things. But I do know what email is, and I like that. So if you're interested, you can email and we'll get back to you. And I can always talk to people independently or individually whenever they want. So I'm available for that. I have committed my life to that, and that's what I do on a daily basis. So I love you guys who are here and everyone out there, and
Love you,
appreciate
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.
appreciate y'all.
Thanks so
being-
much, Jack.
You got
Thank
it.
you, Jack.
Hey, have a great day, everybody.
Peace.